Let's see if Ijaz has his hand raised again. Let's see if he's able to, if he's got a better environment.
Hear me?
Hi, Ijaz.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I can't come on camera. I'm really sorry. I was out in Starbucks. I went to watch Black Panther today, so you have to forgive me for being late.
It's okay.
All right, so could I get a couple of minutes with Jay? Would that be okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, so Jay, it's finally good to meet you. I listened to you answering my question earlier. So I have a question to ask you. What was Dr. Tayyab Atakulich's conclusion at the end of his facsimile on the Topkapi manuscript?
Well, I went through it, his conclusions. Or maybe you weren't here when I went through that.
Yeah.
He said that this was the late first century AH, which would be the early part of the 8th century up until 749. And he said that there were 2,270 variants in this text with the 1924.
Yeah. Well, what was his conclusion at the end, the very end?
He said very clearly, this is not Uthmanic.
No, what was his conclusion in the last paragraph? What did he say?
I'll have to open up and find it because you're asking me.
He says that it is exactly like the Quran that we read today, from Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim to the final Surah An-Nas. So do you disagree with his conclusion?
Okay, let me ask you this. It's interesting that he has exactly the same, and yet he said earlier in that there were 2,270 variants.
Yeah,
so
because he agrees that orthographic variants. Because he agrees that they're orthographic variants.
The orthographic variants, yes,
Yeah.
Because of the fact that they are different, therefore he is showing that there are thousands of variants, proves that they cannot be the same. Now, I leave that with you. I leave that with you.
Say that there. Hold on, Jay. I think you're misleading yourself. Orthographic differences don't change the context. For example, he gives 3 words that account for those 2,000 variants. Hala, Atta, and I forgot the third one. Hatta and Allah. He says that there are spelling differences, but they're pronounced exactly the same. So do you think that words that are spelled differently but pronounced the same, they change the meaning of the text? That's what you're saying.
We went through that, and we said they do change.
No, that's what his conclusion led to.
You're going to disagree with me, but listen.
No, I'm disagreeing with you.
Just to help you out, we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at all those differences. We now have the Topkapi. We have, and the next time I come on, maybe we should just zero in on the Topkapi, since that's the one that most.
But Jay, that's what I don't understand. You're saying that the orthographic differences do not coalesce with his conclusion.
The consonantal differences
to him.
Change are different on the Topkapi with the 1924 that we have today. I'm not talking about
the 1924 is really different with the Aleph. I'll give you an example, Jay. What did the Turks do before 1924 with the Aleph? What did they do?
We're not talking about the Dagger Aleph. I'm not referring to the Dagger Aleph here.
No, what did they do? I'm asking.
That he comes up with, but that's the only one that I've ever heard Muslims come up with. Oh, these are just Dagger Aleph. Only about a third of them are Dagger Aleph. When we come back again, we'll go through the Topkapi. In fact, that would be a good session to do, just looking at the Topkapi and showing you, take out the Dagger Aleph, take out the Aleph, and let's see what the canonical differences are between the Topkapi and the one that we have today.
But you don't have to do that. There's already a 1971 thesis that did this. It's about 60 pages long. So are you not familiar with the basic literature on this topic?
We now have besides what they said in 1960, we now have
1971.
We have the material at hand today. You were here when I talked about the Quran Gateway. This is all not going to be.
I know. I sent a review of the website to Andy Bannister. I actually looked through the code and I presented some examples of mistakes for him. I actually have a review of the website on my own website. I watched all the videos. I had access to the database, everything. I'm quite ashamed that you didn't know that. So let's get back to the point. So Dr. Atakulich is saying it's the same. He points out orthographical differences, and based on your own scholarship, you disagree with his authority. Is that correct?
Listen, I'm going to disagree with him, obviously, because you're not going to hear what I'm saying. Nonetheless, rather than sit there and banty back and forth as you like to do, Ijaz, let's go ahead and let's
not get personal, Jay. Please, let's not get personal. I'm asking you to be professional.
And let's see exactly what we're talking about, because I think people need to know. I think because I'm hearing this from Muslims all the time, there is no difference. There is no difference. These are not.
I'm admitting that there are differences. I'm not saying that there are no differences. We clearly agree that there are differences.
And please say that in public, that there are differences.
Jay, I've said that in my paper response to you that has like 30,000 downloads so far. Have you forgotten that? It's in the top 1%.
Responded to that. I don't know why you don't have. Maybe you didn't. You haven't seen our response to your
Jay, I actually emailed you and you never got back to me. You told me 2 weeks later.
Sent them up. We put it up. You should have access to it. I'm sorry you don't.
Okay? Do you have the access to the? Where's the response? Where is it? What is it entitled?
Response to Ijaz Ahmad. It was done by a committee, a group of people in London. They did it in the late 2014. So we're talking about 3.5 years.
3 years later, and there's nothing to show for that. That's what you're saying.
No,
I'll give you an example, Jay. I'll give you an example. You quote Darush a bunch of times in that debate you did with Dr. Ali, and he says it's the same Quran. So are you saying that you agree with Dr. Atakulich, you disagree with Dr. Fideli, you disagree with Darush on all the evidences that they have presented? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is this. Listen, and listen to what I quote. When you look at the Topkapi is a mid-8th century manuscript.
Not mid-8th, you're wrong.
By the mid-8th century manuscript, you do have probably the best manuscript available, and that is the Topkapi. And it looks like it was probably, we don't know yet. I'm just speculating here. It was probably the one that all the others were being standardized to. Now that's telling in and of itself, because what we're saying, what that suggests is that by the sometime after Abu Talib, which sorry, not Abu Talib,
Abdul Malik,
the Walid, the son of Abdul Malik, the Quran started to be coalescing, and so you have possibly, we're not, I have to be careful because I don't want to quote on this. Possibly the Topkapi was the one that became the standard text. That is mid-8th century. So that is a good 100 years after the time, or nearly 100 years after the time of Uthman.
That would be incorrect, Jay. If you read Dr. Atakulich's paper, he specifies that it is within the second half of the 1st century Hijri. When does the Hijri calendar begin? At 621, at 50 years? 71. So you're still within the 7th century.
That's what he says, or the beginning of the 2nd century.
Oh, that's the key word. It continues from the second half into the other half. Do you understand that?
And when does it end? When does the 1st century end? 719, sorry. 719, so the second.
Right, so it's between the 7th and the 8th. So why do you only say the 8th?
You look at AH with AD, and we're talking about the 8th century by that time.
Right, but he also says 7th century. So why do you only go to the 8th?
No, he said the second half of the
1st century.
The second half would be the beginning of the 8th century, and the first half of the 8th of the 2nd century.
Jay, hold on. Wait with me here.
19 on.
Hold on, Jay. Let's work this out. Let's do simple math. 622 CE is when the Hijri calendar begins. Agree?
Right. And goes to 719.
Hold on. Add 50 years. What do you get?
And goes to 719.
Hold on. Add 50 years. What do you get? You get 672. So it's between 672 and the early half of the 8th century. So why do you?
What he says. He then says the latter half of the 1st century AH to
the 1st century AH. That's it. You said it. Of the 1st century AH. So then why do you change it?
2nd century AH, the beginning of the 2nd century AH, which begins in 719. Yeah, Ijaz, listen, you can sit there and bandy around back and forth.
Hold on. I have it in front of me.
You don't get confused with the century AH and the AD, Western equivalent.
I was muted by the host. They don't want me to speak to you, apparently.
No, I can hear you.
Yeah, he just muted me. Johnson, would you stop?
I can hear you fine. Continue on. I don't know why if he did.
Yeah, I mean, just malicious. So I have it in front of me, right? He says Atakulich dates the Topkapi manuscript to the second half of the 1st century AH.
To the beginning of the 2nd century. But you can quote the whole thing. Don't just quote the first part.
I'm responding to your point that it's only 8th century. Why don't you agree it's also the 7th century?
No, I think very clearly. Again, maybe we need to write to Atakulich and say, can you be more?
No, it's in English. I've asked him. This is English. So he says the second half of the 1st century AH. Why do you deny that?
Well, I don't deny it. I said up to 719. From 672 up to 719 is a second half of the 1st century. But also, he then continues that it could also be the first half of the 2nd century. Now, again,
he says that due to the vowel and the dotted. Hold on, Jay. Jay, he says due to the vowelin and dotting. So the vowelin and dotting was added in the first half of the 2nd century, but the original text was written in the second half of the 1st century. What do you not understand?
That statement right there, even to the voweling, and the voweling was put on probably at a later date. You do know that.
Yeah, that's what he says. Let me read the quote again. Dates the top copy manuscript to the second half of the 1st century AH and the first half of the 2nd century due to vowelin and dotting.
There you go.
81.
So you just said what I've been trying to tell you for the last 10 minutes.
No, you're denying it's 7th century.
I'm going with listen, I'm going with what most people interpret his writing as, and most people that I've come across do interpret that
it's not what people interpret. That's eisegesis. You have to go to himself.
You don't want it because you are stuck in that one little box that forces you to maintain that it has to be.
Okay, I've spoken to Dr. Artakulich. I don't believe that you have, so I'm coming for the authority himself.
You also, Ijaz, you also have to be careful that much of everything that Muslims are going to say, including yourself, has to force everything into that box that it must be 7th century. Are you also going to tell me, Ijaz, that the Topkapi is the same as the Samarkand, which is the same as
I'm going to make those silly claims, Jay.
The Husseini, which is the same as the Sana. Are you going to say that they all agree as well? And that they're all
attack a straw man. So let me finish my point. This is what he goes on to say. There are 2,270 instances where there is dissimilarity between the Topkapi Musaf and the Fad Musaf. Most of them concerning whether or not the word was written with an alif. With an alif, G. Alif.
Listen. Rather than sit there and bandy about on this, can we go ahead and and we will show you the differences between the top and also the
let's come to a conclusion. Jay, let's come to a conclusion if you don't mind.
Are you going to listen to me or are you going to talk over top of me?
I have a question for you.
I listened to you. I listened to what you were saying. You're not even hearing what I'm saying. You're talking as I'm talking. Be at least shut down. I know you're excited. I know you always
don't call me excited. Jay. I'm not excited. I'm not a woman who can get wrong.
When we're looking at these different manuscripts, and I didn't just bring up the Topkapi, I brought 6 major manuscripts. And you're assuming now suddenly that these all agree. Now you're saying...
I did not say they agree, Jay. I've never said that.
You're only looking at one argument. You're saying that Artakulich, and he has to say this, and I understand why he has to say this. But what you're going to find out is more and more scholars are now going to be looking at the datings. They're going to be asking very certainly difficult and damaging questions because the datings are not agreeing with a 7th century manuscript. Look at the Sana manuscript. Look at, were you here when we talked about the 2 different layers?
Yes, of course I know about the 2 layers. You know me. Hold on, Jay, let's come to an agreement. I have a question for you. One question, okay? Can we have this discussion live? Me and you. You choose the topic, we sit down and we discuss it.
Well, what I would like to do is actually talk about the Topkapi, and let's look and see. And
no, I'm set up a further date.
Let's get them, and let's look and see what the differences are between these manuscripts.
No, I'm asking
if there are differences. You're claiming there are no differences.
I never said that.
They're all 7th century.
I never said that.
You're claiming that the only differences are the majority of the differences are nothing more than alifs.
I didn't say that. Only specific to the Topkapi. That's what Artakulich himself says. I've quoted it in my paper.
Okay, that these are mostly alif differences.
That's what he says. That's what he says.
Let's see if that's true. Let's come back and let's see if that's true.
Okay, but Jay, I'm asking, can we set up a date where we can do this one-on-one in front of the public?
Well, we can do it right now. We can do it in front of. We can do it on this.
Yeah, I haven't prepared anything. I've just come from the movie.
No, we're not going to do it today, and I'm not ready to do it right now because I just got the Quran Gateway. But if you say you have access to the Quran Gateway,
yeah, I used to until November 2017.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a security error. I think I sent it to Andy. I'm not sure, but you should.
Why don't you ask Andy if he can give it to you again, since he's the one that's responsible for it?
Oh no, he has to close it down. He can't.
Get in contact with John. Get in talk with John. Let's do another webinar and let's just look and let's just do a comparison.
You and me. Is that a deal? You and me. That's a deal.
That's a deal. We'll do it, and we'll do it on air with John McClatchy.
He as the moderator, correct?
I'm sorry.
With him as the moderator, correct? Okay, so you agree. That's all I needed to ask. But do you have any questions to ask me? You have me at your disposal now.
Not really, no.
Okay, I have a question to ask you. I didn't hear it.
There's some other questions I want to get to. Ijaz, it's been great talking.
Let's stop there, and on some other occasion we can have Ijaz and Jay in dialogue. But let's move on for this evening to some other questions, and then we'll wrap up. Vladimir Sisig asked, are the slides used available for download? Could you perhaps email them to Jonathan, who can further distribute them to us in the Apologetics Academy for further use?
Oh, I'm sorry. This is when you're reading. Is it possible the Quran is completely inspired? If that is,
I'm reading.